I'll admit this is the part that I've been most looking forward to in this series, talking about my void Vlad. My boy Vlad. Before I made this channel, I was into battle tactics and strategy. Like, I know that I cover a lot of that on this channel, but I had this fascination way before this channel was ever created, like back when I was a teenager. I used to play this game called Dungeons and Dragons. You might have heard of it. I even served as a dungeon master at some points, and in one of my worlds, I created this like world with this huge complex history, and um my players inhabited this kingdom, this, well, more of an empire really. And they got in good with one of my NPCs, which was a king, or the emperor of the entire nation, whose name was Alderian Stormruler. And I kind of put into this NPC a lot of history. I mean, I put a lot of history into my world building. Like, I created this whole lineage of kings and emperors and how each one died. Like, I went full world building. That was like one of my favorite aspects, even though my players never actually got to really learn much about it all. I still had it on standby, because I had a lot of fun with the world building aspects. And during the campaigns, they basically kind of became allies with the emperor of the, empire that they inhabited. They became allies with Alderian Stormruler, helping him at several points, even helping him reclaim his throne at some points. And I'm mentioning all this because I kind of put in all my love for battlefield tactics and like great commanders into Alderian. And kind of making him like the best general of his age. And he had a lot of accomplishments that mirrored other great commanders. Like, he had a crossing of a desert, which I meant a desert dotted previously uncrossable, and it was meant to kind of emulate Hannibal Barca's crossing of the Alps. But I guess in actual practice, not thinking about it was more of a homage to Alexander's crossing of the desert, actually, now that I think about it. He had other accomplishments, such as, basically a lot of accomplishments like that, which were meant to either directly be inspired by or pay homage to other great commanders. Like, he was an amalgamation of several accomplishments and traits from commanders that I admired, like Hannibal Barca, Alexander the Great, Napoleon and Julius Caesar. And oddly enough, Vlad Tepes. Like, in one, I was fortunate that my world and my campaign actually had a decisive end with one last, we would call them seasons or arcs, kind of like anime in that sense. And and in one of the final arcs, in the last one, Alderian actually did what Vlad did with the Forest of the Impalement, which was meant to kind of we used as a shock tactic to basically ward off an invading enemy that was far greater than him. And that's kind of like what when Mehmed saw the Forest of the Impaled, and in some sources say he wanted to get the heck out of Wallachia after witnessing that. It was meant to emulate or be a direct reference to that, though my players, my friends at the time, never really got all my history tactical references. But I'm telling you all this because, like I said, I had this love for commanders and generals that I poured into even my own campaigns when I was a teenager at that time. And with Alderian being this amalgamation of various characters. He was the NPC I was most proud of. I loved him. I got to really show off my references to like war and tactics through him. Unfortunately, like I said, my friends were never into that stuff, so they never got all these references. But I had a lot of fun with that. And again, Vlad was one of the inspirations that I put into him. And, even before this channel, I had a fascination with Vlad the Impaler as a teenager. I think he's a very underrated, military force. Most people, when we talk about him, usually just get to the he was a monster. I feel like most opinions of him that aren't Romanian I see, or just write him off as, oh, he was a monster, a bloodthirsty, evil person, and that's it. That's usually where the discourse ends. The only time I don't see people have that opinion is when Romanians talk about him, where he's a hero and, he was a warrior for Christianity. Those are usually, like I said, I only really hear those opinions, those positive opinions, though, from Romanians. Like, everyone who isn't Romanian, at least that I've met and heard discuss about him, is very much just negative, just write him off. But I feel like there's a lot more complexity to the man. In some ways, I kind of think of him as Timur. Like, I kind of put those two people in the same camp, because Timur definitely is a very brutal man, who did a lot of brutal things, but he weaponized brutality to an effective degree to, accomplish things. And I feel like Vlad definitely weaponized brutality in that same sense. And both of these men weren't just brutes in a sense that, like, just I mean, I know this is a matter of debate, but I don't think they were just blood-hungry brutes, like, just, let's just keep killing and maiming and stuff. I mean, they did do that, but, I think that they were both incredibly intelligent individuals who, you often hear about, like, Timur being a lover of, like, the more intellectual things of life, like art and whatnot, and Vlad was very intelligent. He was raised among the Ottomans, as a hostage, and he used his intelligence. I feel like both were very cunning, both were very intelligent, and both were, utilized brutality in a very effective way, which I think makes them more terrifying. Like, if you're just a dumb brute who just maims and kills people, that's one thing, but if you're an intelligent person who uses that, it makes you more dangerous, and I feel like the two have a lot in common in that regard. I feel like they're very similar in that respect. And like I said, I've even, like, back then, like, while I was becoming a fan of Hannibal Barca as a teenager and getting really into military tactics, there was a time where, like, yeah, Vlad was pretty up there for me. Like, Vlad was up there, like, with Hannibal Barca, and I admired a lot of Vlad's accomplishments, like the night raid, very ballsy move. Granted, he had to use guerrilla warfare against the Ottomans. No way was he gonna have a direct pitch battle, and I feel like sometimes when you use guerrilla warfare, it knocks you down a peg, or at least I feel like people would knock people down a peg, because, it's one thing if you're winning decisive battles, pitched battles, like Napoleon or Caesar or Hannibal, and then some might say, I've read some discourse that some wouldn't place, like, guerrilla leaders on the same level because they had to utilize, not as direct, tactics, and I've even heard some people call it more of a bit of a, again, these are things I've read. I'm not saying this because I'm a fan of Vlad, but less legitimate or whatnot, and I disagree personally with those who have that opinion. I think, that would have been suicidal and stupid. And so Vlad, I think, was incredibly intelligent. He utilized his limited manpower and resources to really, give Mehmed kind of a lot of danger, like Mehmed's life, with the night attack and whatnot. Well, and I think my favorite account of this, like, confrontation is definitely the Forest of the Impalement, which, again, I took direct inspiration for one of my characters in my D&D world for Aldrian. But like, the accounts I've read is that, when Mehmed saw, like, the 20,000 people on, impaled, that he wanted to get out. Like, he saw that, and some sources say he was amazed, and then he was quoted as saying something along the lines of, "How could I deprive a country of a man willing to do great things like this?" Or at least of the same vein. And he wanted to leave, and then some sources I've read that his advisors were convincing him to continue the war, had to convince him to continue. Because, again, he was so shocked by the side he was done. And I kind of like that story. That's resonated with me, because again, it's not like the Ottomans are any different to brutality. Like, Vlad learned brutality from the Ottomans. Like, impalement isn't something that the Ottomans didn't do. I've even heard sometimes saying that, you know, Vlad learned that from them. So it's not like Mehmed's some squeamish guy who's never seen like brutality. He has. So in a world that's incredibly brutal like this age, Vlad managed to like out violence, I guess, other people, and even shock other people by his violence, is very telling of what he accomplished in that regard. And it's a story that always resonates with me. And again, like, you know, a man who definitely weaponized terror and fear. Another great story I've about Vlad is, there's a story, I don't think it's very valid, or at least I've heard it's not as valid, but point is, you might have heard it, where he put like a cup or a golden goblet or something by a well, and it said during his reign, no one would dare steal it. He just left it out there. Even then, like, even if it's not true or not, like, the fact that it could kind of be believable and at least speak volumes of how he kept people in line is very telling. Like I said, I think he was a genius in utilizing brutality and violence to his advantage, considering he didn't have a lot against his adversaries. And I feel like he's a very intelligent man who did a lot with very little. I think, you know, that's why I have this admiration or fascination with Vlad Tepes and the Impaler. And, you know, like I said, when it comes to the discourse surrounding him, most people just write it off as, oh, he was an evil person, and that's it. That's usually as far as you go, or unless you're talking to, like, Romanians who will say he was a hero of Christianity, but that's usually, like, that's kind of the extremes. I feel like there's more of a middle ground with him, and I wish there was more discussion about him, because I feel like he is a much more complex and interesting. Oh wait, there is a third course of discussion about him. It's how he inspired Dracula, which I've heard some, how do you say, you know, like, when it comes to like the discussion of the Bram Stoker's creation of Dracula, the popular myth or popular idea that you'll hear most people say is he inspired, Vlad Tepes, the Impaler, inspired Dracula directly. Though, again, upon, like, readings, there's a lot of contention with that point. People saying, not really, it's just he happened to stumble across the name Dracula and then used it. It wasn't meant to be Vlad. There's debate. It's a very interesting thing. I won't get into it because there's a lot of points. But, point is, that's usually where I feel like, most people you talk to will probably just say, oh yeah, he inspired Dracula, right? That's kind of like the popular, cultural idea. Regardless of how much truth there is to it, it still is, I think, widely believed. And, like I said, I find, I used to be big on fiction before this channel. You know, I used to like a lot of fantasy and stuff. I used to play Dungeons and Dragons, but, you know, medieval-esque fantasy, but I don't really enjoy fantasy anymore. I don't really enjoy fiction anymore because of this channel. Like, I'm watching real history, and I find it more interesting. I find it more unexpected. I find it more surprising, more shocking, and, you know, oftentimes a lot more stranger. But I think, like, Vlad Tepes is much more interesting than Count Dracula. I think the real life man is, you know, so fascinating. And I know that I'm talking a lot, and I usually try not to go this long in intro, so I just really want to talk because I've had quite a journey with Vlad Tepes, and oh yeah, also the Night Raid, like my character Aldrian Stormruler in the final campaigns I did, actually alongside a player character who tagged along with him, actually did a Night Raid on a superior army. So another thing I directly used from Vlad Tepes was his night attack, in my campaign that my players went along with. So again, like I said, like I've had this fascination with him for over like a decade, like 10 years ago when I was a teenager. So, you know, I have this fascination, and I feel like I wish more people would kind of look more into him and like have more diverse discourse around him. And really talk about how fascinating, intelligent, like I think two things can be true at the same time. Can you definitely say he was a brutal, maybe even monstrous man? Sure, you know, you definitely can, but I feel like you can also say he is someone who fought against the Ottomans under an idea of, you know, Christianity, and an underdog who fought to, you know, overcome a much bigger force caught between Hungary and, you know, the Ottomans, and put everything he could into fighting for Wallachia's, you know, kind of presence. So I don't know, I feel like there's so much complexity that a lot of people, at least the discourse that I've read and seen, don't really get into, just kind of writing it off with him as black or white, which kind of makes me sad because I think he is very underrated, even like in a militaristic and tactical sense. Sure, he had to rely on guerrilla warfare, which I think is not wrong, but I know some people don't really rate guerrilla leaders on the same level as those who win more decisive pitched battles. But in my opinion, he was beyond resourceful. Some of his accomplishments were great, such as, you know, the Force of the Impaled. I think probably one of the best use of psychological warfare that I've ever seen ever. And, you know, the Night Attack, which while wasn't successful, was a very daring move. And, you know, a guy who, I feel like there's so much also a bit of tragedy in the sense of how everything ended up for him. I don't know, like I said, I can go forever. I really enjoy talking about this man, and I've had quite the history in my own free time pre this channel's existence of kind of looking into him and being very fascinated by him as a person. And like I said, I'm hoping that there will be, at least if someone ever comes across my videos, maybe a bit more, might inspire someone to look a bit more into him, and, you know, maybe see him in a more complex view, as all people should be looked at. Like I said, I've rambled long enough. We need to get to the video now. So let's get to it. Let's get to Vlad the Impaler, aka, well, no, his name is Vlad Tepes Dracula, aka the Impaler.
For many centuries, the Wallachians of Eastern Europe, also known as the Vlachs, had been at the epicenter of countless converging civilizations, such as the Eastern Romans, Bulgarians, Pechenegs, Kuman Kipchaks, and the Mongols. However, the origins of the Principality of Wallachia as an independent polity began in the early 14th century. By the start of the century, the numerous Orthodox Vlach boyars of the Lower Danube and the Southern Carpathians had been nominal vassals of the mighty Kingdom of Hungary. Seeking independence from their Catholic overlords, the petty Vlach lords of this region united under the leadership of Basarab I, and by doing so, achieved a surprising and decisive victory over the Hungarians at the Battle of Posada in 1330. In spite of gaining independence, Wallachia was to spend the rest of its existence surrounded by its more potent neighbours. By the 1390s, the Ottoman armies had absorbed the majority of Bulgaria and vassalized Serbia after the Battle of Kosovo. With Muslim raiders now raiding north of the Danube, it seemed like the Vlachs were the next in a long list of peoples that had submitted to the Ottoman war machine. In spite of the odds, a stubborn and energetic Mircea I of Wallachia was to hinder such ambitions for over 30 years. During his reign, the voivode achieved what many in Christian Europe could not during the period, defeating the Ottoman Sultan in open battle, not only once but twice at the battles of Karanvasa.
Yeah, another very underrated guy from the last season. Wallachia handing Bayezid some of his earliest and, decisive defeats, which, again, goes to show just the great resistance that Wallachia had. So, it's something I did admire a lot.
Rovina in 1394 and 1395. Ushering in a military golden age, Mircea was able to keep his principality independent from both the Hungarians and the Ottomans, even managing to expand his realm into northern Dobruja, the lower Danube delta, and parts of Transylvania by the end of the century. Despite these successes, this golden age would end with the death of Mircea in 1418, and what followed was a constant violent civil war between the two cadet houses of the Basarab dynasty, the Daneshti and Strakuleshti. During this instability, the lands of the realm contracted, while members of each cadet house pledged their allegiance to either Hungary or the Ottomans for political and military support against fellow rival claimants. As a result, Wallachia had become a crucial buffer state for both the Hungarians and the Turks in their wider wars across the Balkans. By the 1440s, Vlad II of Wallachia would play an unwinnable balancing game of trying to gain favour with both of the two royal courts of Buda and Edirne for the survival of his regime.
That's something I always found interesting, like with the Romanian areas in history, especially around this time, just sandwiched between Hungary and the Ottomans and like struggling to survive. It's really a great underdog story that I can't help but be super interested in. And, just even holding on for as long as they did, I still think is beyond impressive.
Tailed the voivode, constantly switching allegiances between the two sides, and even giving away his second and third eldest sons, Vlad and Radu, as political hostages to the Sultan's court. However, such acts of playing both sides proved futile, as the voivode was dethroned by his Daneshti relative, the pro-Hungarian Vladislav II, who had the military backing of John Hunyadi. The voivode was killed in 1447, along with his eldest son, Mircea II. According to Balkan chronicles, the boyars of Targovishte ripped out Mircea's eyes before proceeding to bury him alive.
Yeah, that's the story I heard too, about, being buried alive. Though, yeah, I'm pretty sure the taking out the eyes I also heard, but I remember it was the burying alive that really resonated with me the most. That's like an awful fate, dude. Yeah.
At the same time, Vlad himself fled into hiding before being brutally assassinated in the marshes near the capital. Meanwhile, the young sons of the slain Wallachian ruler would continue to live in the Sultan's court of Edirne for a number of years, where they were given an Ottoman education and trained alongside the elite janissaries. Yet an opportunity arose for the older of the two boys, Vlad, in the fall of 1448, when the Ottoman and Crusader armies of Murad II and Hunyadi faced off at the Second Battle of Kosovo. Wallachia had been left virtually undefended during the military campaign, as Vladislav II and his army had marched alongside the Crusader host, thus
Vlad had several reigns. The first one, which I think he's about to get to, didn't last as long. The second reign, I think, is where most of the stuff with the Ottomans happens. He was captured by Hungary, imprisoned for many years, and then released, and I think it's in that release from Hungarian captivity that he eventually met his end. So he had several reigns, at least, before either being captured or removed or whatnot.
Allowing Vlad to easily usurp power in the country as a pro-Ottoman ruler. However, his reign would last only 2 months, because despite the Crusaders' defeat in Kosovo, Vladislav returned with the remnant of his army and reclaimed his throne. After being exiled from his homeland once more, the Draculeshti prince first sought shelter in Edirne, before settling down in the Principality of Moldavia and later in Transylvania. He would spend the next 7 years building up a political base of support in Brezhov, with other exiled Vlach notables in the local region. While the Ottoman and Hungarian armies were preoccupied over the fortress city of Belgrade in the summer of 1456, the exiled voivode, seeking revenge for the past murders of his late father and brother, entered into Wallachia at the head of a mercenary force from southern Transylvania. The following war was to be short. By convincing Vladislav to engage in single combat for the fate of their homeland.
Yeah, Vlad had several instances. Another trait about him is that he was a really good fighter. Like we also did cover him from the History March video. Dude had several 1v1 duels and just kept owning people. I think one of the most interesting stories is that actually after winning a duel, he had the loser basically dig his own grave and then killed him. Like, the man was definitely cold-blooded, bro. But like I said, like, this world especially is so brutal that I think personally, and this might just be my historical headcanon, that he utilized brutality to make up for, you know, a lot of other stuff, like maybe lack of manpower and whatnot. And so his mindset was, let me be as brutal, in fact, let me be more brutal than most to like inspire fear and dread in those who will face off against me. I think, like, yeah, he weaponized brutality, because again, a lot of the discourse around him is just writes him off as, oh, he was just a sadist, he loved it. Like, another famous story about him is, you know, like, he was dining under like a bunch of impaled people, and then he like dipped his bread in blood or something before eating it. Stuff like that, you know. Some of the stuff written about him might have been a bit exaggerated, because there was people, definitely even at his time, just writing him off as this, like, some sadist dude gets off on killing and impaling people. And again, hard to say fully because I didn't know the guy, but like, I think at times it was more of a strategic thing rather than a pleasurable thing. I mean, maybe, who knows, but like, I'm willing to bet at times it was definitely more of a strategic mind game, psychological warfare, in the sense of inspiring so much fear that it'll keep people in line and keep people away from doing things. That's how I feel personally, though, you know.
Had succeeded in delivering a fatal blow to the man who had inflicted great pain upon him over the past decade. Upon re-entering Targovishta, the new voivode began consolidating his power by appointing loyal followers into high political offices, while at the same time confiscating the wealth of boyars who had been faithful to the previous regime. With this wealth, Vlad constructed new fortifications and roads, reformed the army, and ultimately initiated the building of a brand new city, Bucharest. Like his late father, the Wallachian ruler also began a correspondence with the royal courts of Buda and Constantinople, in which he pledged his full loyalty to the Hungarian king, while at the same time sending a yearly tribute to the Ottoman Sultan. However, as Vlad III consolidated his power in the country, he gained a reputation for being a cruel ruler throughout Europe, as he often burned and impaled his political enemies in great showcases of brutality. Petty criminals, beggars, and even whole villages that were considered disloyal to the crown were also subjected to the stake during this reign of terror. The peak of these horrific actions against his fellow countrymen occurred during an Easter banquet in 1457 at the capital.
Yeah, there were several banquets I remember. One, he invited a bunch of nobles or whatnot, and then basically just killed them all, like locked them in and killed them. I think another one is he invited all these people, like, another story goes, he invited all these people into like the poor, the lazy or whatnot, those he deemed kind of undesirable, and then locked them in and then burned them, like burn the building, you know, as his way to get rid of any people who won't help or contribute, as he saw it, to Wallachia. And yeah, again, these showcases of brutality, bro, definitely wild. Again, like, I feel like I mentioned this earlier, but I do feel like he has some similarities to Timur. Like, I feel like he's like a much smaller Timur, because Timur was a much larger scale threat to the world. But, you know, in terms of like a lot of their legacies and whatnot and stuff. I feel like they have a lot of similarities, in my opinion.
Which was later to be known by folklore as the Easter Massacre. The brutal event saw a paranoid Vlad delivering a speech in front of 200 guests, primarily consisting of boyars and their families, before ordering their execution and impalement for alleged treason against his late father and brother. This iron-fisted and cruel method of governing his realm was likely influenced by Vlad's childhood traumas stemming from his early days in exile across the Balkans. Moreover, the constantly turbulent nature of Wallachian politics may have influenced the young ruler to take drastic actions to secure.
To be fair, that's also understandable. Every time we come back to Wallachia or Romania in general, every time we show up, the boyars are always the ones causing the most trouble among whoever the king is, and the king's always having to deal with the boyars being unloyal, turning on him, turning on them, and whatnot. So, I guess Vlad's approach was, alright, let me be super brutal and keep them in line. Like I said, I think it was a strategic thing, that he weaponized it for gain. But yeah, definitely, you gotta think there's a lot of trauma and unresolved anger. Being a hostage, how his family was killed, just, yeah, you'd imagine there's probably a chip on his shoulder, right? That probably stemmed from his youth.
His throne from potential pretenders and court rivals. Whatever the reasoning was, in Vlad's new Wallachia, fear now became a unifying force with which to exert power. With Hunyadi's death in 1456 and Vlad's impalement of all allegedly disloyal Saxon merchants in Wallachia, relations between Buda and Targovishte began to sour by the end of the decade. By 1460, a new pro-Hungarian pretender, Dan III, invaded Wallachia with military support from the Saxon nobility of Transylvania. However, Dan's army was ambushed and decimated near the town of Rutsar in a brief one-sided battle. After the engagement, the Daneshti prince was humiliated into digging his own grave before being beheaded by Vlad himself.
Again, talk about a message, holy crap.
In the wake of his significant victory, the Wallachian voivode invaded and pillaged a number of Saxon settlements in southern Transylvania, impaling thousands throughout the region.
Then, forgetting it all and being evil-minded towards one who had trusted him, Vlad revolted against the Sultan. First, he secretly crossed the Danube with a large and powerful army and invaded all of the adjacent sections of the Sultan's domains, namely around Nicopolis and Vidin.
While Sultan Mehmed II was on his military campaign against Trebizond in 1461, an Ottoman delegation was sent to Wallachia as Vlad had failed to pay his annual tribute to the Sultan.
Again, there's so many stories. I'm sorry I keep interrupting, but like another one is that some Ottoman envoys like went up to him and then he's like, hey, why don't you remove your turbans or something like that, and they're like, well, you know, we can't do that. It's like, cool. And he like nails them to their heads, like the turbans. Again, there's so much around this guy. I'm sorry. Just like every time I talk about it, I just keep remembering these stories about him.
For the last 3 years, the voivode excused his failed payments on his war with the Saxon nobles of Transylvania, but the mood between the two courts had already soured a year prior with the execution of a Turkish envoy. Hamza Pasha, the provincial governor of Nicopolis, led the Ottoman delegation and was responsible for collecting the withheld Wallachian tribute, along with 1,000 Wallachian boys for the Sultan's Janissary Corps. However, his secret mission was to kidnap the Wallachian ruler and bring him to Constantinople to answer for his crimes against an Ottoman official. In spite of the secrecy of the operation, Vlad was informed about the true mission of the Turkish delegation by his many spies in the Balkans. Upon entering Wallachia at the head of a 1,000-strong cavalry host, the Ottoman governor was ambushed by Vlad and was later impaled alongside many other of his officers. In the days after this great ambush, Vlad marched on the border Ottoman fortress town of Giurgiu, located north of the Danube. Dressed in full Turkish military attire...
Yeah, another great use of his... Because again, Vlad was raised among the Ottomans, like he had many years of training under them. So he could speak, I think, like, you know, their language and whatnot, and managed to convince them to let him in, essentially disguising himself. And once they let him in, he just attacked from the inside. Like, again, like, the dude was very cunning. I think very crafty and very clever with stories like that, you know?
And speaking fluent Turkish, the voivode was able to trick the garrison of the town into opening its gates. Before long, the nearby Wallachian army stormed into the town, killing its entire garrison. Soon after the capture of Giurgiu, Vlad would launch perhaps one of the most violent expeditions in medieval European history by invading Ottoman Bulgaria at the start of 1462. With most of the Ottoman army still campaigning in distant Anatolia, hundreds of defenseless villages and towns were set ablaze, and their populations were massacred by impalement, including thousands of women and children. All in all, over 28,000 Turks and Bulgarians were killed in only a few weeks, and thousands more fled south towards Constantinople, sharing gruesome stories of the Wallachian ruler along the way.
What treachery the impaler voivode has committed. He slaughters without regard, innocent or guilty.
On top of the mass killings, all Ottoman supply depots in northern Bulgaria and crossing points over the Danube were burnt down. Upon hearing of the horrific news coming out of the Balkans, an ever-so-rageful Mehmed II rushed back to his capital to prepare for war. Mustering the largest Ottoman army seen since his siege on Constantinople 9 years prior, the Sultan was eager to punish his vassal, whom he had grown up with since his days as a prince in Edirne. With a grand army of 60 to 80,000 strong and a fleet of over 170 ships, Mehmed personally marched on Wallachia in April of 1462. Also with the Sultan was Prince Radu, Vlad's younger brother, who had spent the last 2
Yeah, Radu. So usually a historical figure that most people don't talk about when it comes to Vlad. It's like, oh yeah, he had a brother. Radu, who's also called Radu the Fair or Radu the Handsome. Yeah, there's a lot about him. You know what's wild? There were like stories that him and Mehmed were like gay lovers, and that like Mehmed did favor Radu a lot, and that they were like lovers, and like Mehmed was like bisexual and stuff. You know what's the wildest part about those stories? They were on Wikipedia at one point. Like there was a section on Wikipedia about Mehmed the Conqueror that about his sexuality, and like people would say, yeah, he was bisexual and whatnot. He had like male lovers, and had, you know, some like stories about like he tried to force himself on Radu, and then Radu like cut him and climbed a tree or something. It's wild. I think the funniest thing is that Wikipedia took that section down. Wait, give me a second. Yeah, it's no longer around. But like many years ago, when I was looking it up, it was there. There was a section that was telling all this. I'm not saying it's true, by the way. Please don't come at me with pitchforks and knives. I'm just saying that there were like stories circulating that you can find about Radu and Mehmed. I don't know Mehmed's sexuality, alright? I'm not gonna say for a fact anything. I'm just relaying information. That's what I read, and that was on Wikipedia at one point. Wikipedia got rid of that section. I'd imagine maybe because people were finding it. But that's wild. I remember that. It's clear as day. I'm not hallucinating. That was there. So yeah, Radu. Who remained loyal. Either way, it still is a fact that Radu and Mehmed definitely did, you know, favor Radu enough to essentially try to, after Mehmed leaves Wallachia, he leaves Radu there, and Radu manages to convince many boyars and whatnot to kind of come to his side, and, you know, kind of eventually leading to the ousting of his brother Vlad. So yeah, Radu being much more loyal to Mehmed. Again, I'm just thinking of all the weird, like, stories I was reading about these two. It's, I don't know. I'm not saying it's true or not. Like, I'm not. I'm just, or maybe it could be. I don't know. But you know, it's still around, which kind of makes me just reminded me of all that.
2 decades living at the Ottoman court. Unlike his elder brother, the Wallachian prince had been a steadfast friend to Mehmed and was deemed loyal enough to command 4,000 janissaries for the campaign to come.
Yes, the popular... I'm glad he's bringing this up, because I just brought this up. The popular myth of a homosexual relationship between Mehmed and Radu originates from the Greek historian. I'm not gonna say his name. Who also depicted Mehmed as a rapist, torturer, and admirer of Vlad, Vlad Tepes' brutality. Yeah, you gotta watch out who's writing the histories, right? But, yes.
Fully embraced Ottoman customs during his time in captivity, Radu was promised control over Wallachia by the Sultan once his brother was overthrown and executed. As Ottoman forces amassed, Vlad began mustering a host himself, between 10,000 to 20,000 strong, made up chiefly of peasants, mercenaries, and a core of elite Vlach cavalry. Like Mircea I before him, the Wallachian voivode planned on using guerrilla tactics in familiar terrain to defeat a numerically superior foreign foe. Military assistance from Hungary was also anticipated, but with no updates about a Western army arriving to support them by summer, Vlad started getting ready to confront the impending Ottoman attack on his own. By June 1462, the Ottoman army...
Yeah, Matthias was the king of Hungary at the time, and they had a really interesting relationship. There are times where Vlad basically went to Matthias asking for aid and whatnot, and Matthias never really committed or helped Vlad in that kind of regard to stand. And eventually, yeah, Matthias just captures Vlad and keeps him in prison for many years. So there definitely is like a very interesting dynamic Matthias plays in Vlad's story.
He had arrived at the Danube and began crossing the great river from the port towns of Vidin and Nicopolis. Although the Wallachians heavily contested the landings, Turkish artillery power in Nicopolis had won the Ottoman army a bridgehead into the country. Meanwhile, the Ottoman navy, under Grand Vizier Mahmud Pasha, began bombarding the town of Braila, Wallachia's only port settlement, setting it ablaze. After a few days of crossing the Danube, Mehmed's host began marching north toward Vlad's capital of Targovishte in full force. While marching up north, Ottoman Akinji raiders, led by Mihalolu Ali Bey, fanned out and began pillaging and burning the Wallachian countryside, killing many in retribution for Vlad's killings earlier in the year. During this chaos, the Wallachian ruler ordered a scorched earth policy along Mehmed's line of march to the capital.
Yeah, there's many things, like him poisoning wells, the scorched earth. Like, Vlad had to pull out every trick of, like, guerrilla warfare and whatnot in order to really kind of start bleeding out Mehmed's mighty host. And, you know, getting rid of them. Like, he had to, bro. Like, you know, when you're facing someone with that overwhelming manpower, like, you gotta do what you gotta do, you know? And again, the scorched earth policy is such an interesting one, because I've never seen it countered. I'm sure there is. I'm sure people will tell me there are times where the scorched earth has been countered. But I'm speaking just specifically on this channel. Every time it's come up, we've never really seen anyone have a good response to it. Whether it be Napoleon or Charles or, you know, anyone. When the scorched earth starts getting used, usually great armies start suffering and don't know how to, like, fully negate the consequences of a scorched earth. Which tells me it's probably one of the most effective military, like, tactics I've ever seen. Though again, it is kind of a double-edged sword because you are burning your own lands, and it comes at a cost to yourself. That's probably the double-edged sword of the scorched earth. But again, every time it's come up, dude, like, we've seen so many great commanders and armies not have a good response and usually just suffer because of it. So again, the scorched earth is a very great maybe one of these days in one of these videos we'll see someone actually be able to counter it, but so far I haven't, on this channel specifically.
Were poisoned, livestock killed, crops burned, towns abandoned, and guerrilla warfare commenced in the region's many dense forests and thick marshes.
Yep.
Although effective in preventing the fall of the fortress town of Bucharest to Mehmed, such tactics proved largely ineffective in stopping the Ottoman army in its march to the Wallachian capital. Reluctant to engage in a set-piece battle, Vlad planned to launch an assault on the Ottoman camp south of Targovishte during the night of June 16th to
The night raid, one of my favorite episodes of Vlad the Impaler, bro. Again, I think if I'm remembering correctly, he managed to split his force, and it was supposed to be a coordinated attack where they both get in and then just go. And Vlad, I believe the goal was to kill Mehmed. Again, the mad lad, the balls on this man. He wanted to try and murder Mehmed. I think he actually did get to the Sultan's tent, but he did not kill Mehmed, obviously. I think he killed another high-ranking official. But, again, just the balls on Vlad coming up with this strategy and plan. Again, can you guys tell I have like a lot of weird like fascination towards this guy? Just I'm like all giddy when he came out. This was the part of the series that I was most looking forward to, because it's the one that I have the most I'm most familiar with. And yeah, bro, it's just the mad lad went for it.
Aiming specifically to dismantle the Turkish command structure by eliminating the Sultan himself. In the hours before the ambush, the Wallachian ruler disguised himself as a Turkish merchant to enter the Ottoman camp and locate the Sultan's tent. Launching his night ambush at 11 PM, Vlad's host of 70...
Yeah, I love how he utilizes his upbringing with the Ottomans to his advantage, speaking Turkish, going undercover and in disguise himself personally to gain the advantage. Like, dude, I'm telling you, the guy was just so crafty. He was so cunning. I really like Vlad. Like I said, I can't help but kind of like be in awe of, you know, some of his accomplishments and what he attempted to do.
1,000 men attacked the Ottoman camp in 2 detachments. With torches lighting the night sky and sounds of horns echoing off tents, an air of chaos filled the Ottoman camp.
I also believe, I think one excerpt that I read about this attack is that Vlad started giving orders in Turkish to add to the confusion. Like, he started just yelling things out in Turkish, giving orders, which further added to confusion among the Turks. Which, I don't know, like I said, that's kind of like funny and like hilarious to personally do that. Just to add to the insanity that's going on here. Just, again, the mad lad, bro.
As Wallachian light cavalry surprisingly broke through its wooden palisades. Simultaneously, Wallachian troops, disguised in captured Turkish military attire, wreaked havoc on already confused Ottoman troops, many of which were slain in their sleep. For hours, the nighttime struggle continued as Vlad spotted the Sultan's tent in the distance. However, in the chaos, the Wallachian ruler instead broke into the Grand Vizier's nearby tent, which was empty. As sunrise approached, Mehmed remained safe and sound, and his janissaries had managed to stabilize the situation. Feeling satisfied in inflicting significant Ottoman losses, estimated to be as high as 10,000, Vlad ordered his hosts to retreat into the dense forests east of the capital. Regardless, in this frenetic retreat, over 1,000 Wallachians would be killed and beheaded by the Akinci raiders of Mihalolu Ali Bey. With that, the infamous night attack at Targovishte concluded.
Again, one of my favorite Vlad episodes that I directly used in my Dungeons & Dragons campaign that my character, my NPC, King Aldrian, used. Like, it's just a cool moment, bro. Like, I don't know. To me, it's just incredibly awesome.
Imagine being able to build an...
Although unsuccessful at killing the Sultan, Vlad's nighttime ambush proved a huge morale shock to the Ottoman army, which had already been exhausted after weeks of marching through the scorched fields of Wallachia. 2 weeks after the crossing of the Danube, the weary Ottoman army arrived beneath the walls of Targovishte and began preparing for a siege. However, surprisingly, the capital's gates were left open, as its local populace had abandoned the city and fled to the Carpathian Mountains in the days prior. As Mehmed's host occupied Targovishte, an even more shocking development was discovered in the city's outskirts. To the horror of the army, thousands of their brethren in arms and slain countrymen were found impaled in a massive forest of mounted stakes. The rotten corpse of Hamza Pasha was also found on top of the highest stake.
Dude, talk about, I'm telling you, this is psychological warfare at its peak. Imagine witnessing this crap. I've heard like numbers being estimated to like obviously in the thousands. I think the highest I heard ever was like 20,000, something like that. And just like witnessing all that, holy crap, that's PTSD for life. that image ain't coming out of your head if you saw something like this. This is more terrifying than any piece of fiction I've ever heard. Even more terrifying than I've read about like frickin' Count Dracula. Like, again, like the sources I've read, and I know that like I'm not. I keep saying if because obviously some sources can't fully be trusted, but like. Again, the sources I've always read and come across, the most frequent ones proposed is that Mehmed saw this and immediately wanted to leave. And he was shocked and in awe at what he witnessed, and that his advisors had to convince him to continue the campaign. But he still left Wallachia after this, like not long after. Like, I'd imagine, yeah, like, even Mehmed must have been a little rattled by by witnessing this, right? Which again, it's not like Mehmed is a stranger to brutality himself. The Ottomans can be very brutal, but like witnessing this, even they must have been like, yo, this man's insane. This is unhinged. Again, this is psychological warfare at its peak, bro. This is sending a message and getting people to see that you're not messing around anymore. Freaking Giga Chad maneuver. This is wow. Weaponizing terror and just brutality for a morale, trying to destroy morale. Like I said, I think it's strategic, his use of brutality and whatnot. Wow. It's good. Like, I'm sorry. Just like I said, there's so much I've read about this for so many years. Like, even when I was a teenager, just... Wow. Again. Alright, let's get to the video.
Symbolizing his high ranking within the Ottoman military. As the deathly forest of stakes was cleared, Mehmed installed Prince Radu in power to gather the support of the local boyars against Vlad. This would prove to be easy, as many such boyars and merchants of Wallachia had been disenfranchised during Vlad's reign of terror and the recent Ottoman War, and so they hurled their support to the more charismatic Radu. Within only weeks, Vlad's support in the country collapsed, and many settlements like Bucharest opened their gates to the new ruler of Wallachia. With his Wallachian campaign seeming to be winding down, Mehmed and his host began marching east towards the port town of Braila, where the Ottoman fleet had been docked.
Yeah, Mehmed having the Radu card was incredibly great, because like I said, while he does leave Radu there, and considering Vlad's brutality, the boyar's tendency to turn on people, and, you know, it's like the perfect storm to leave someone else for the boyars to rally around. It really was a great move that he had Radu in his back pocket for this.
During his eastern march, the Sultan had also sent a military detachment to assist Vlad's cousin, Stefan III of Moldavia, in his siege on Wallachian-held Kilia.
The Hungro-Wallachian garrison had been installed by John Hunyadi in the Moldavian fortress of Kila in 1448 during the Moldavian succession crisis.
His night ambush, Vlad had garrisoned the Black Sea fortress with 7,000 soldiers, diverting his total strength against the Ottomans to his west. Despite Mehmed's advancing host, this move was to prove vital as the opportunistic Moldavian voivode was forced to lift the siege after suffering major losses against the defenders and being wounded in the ankle. Returning from Kilia, the Wallachian voivode decided to ambush Mehmed's army one last time, in an attempt to reclaim his realm. However, this attempt was to prove fruitless, as the Ottoman host, encamped near the town of Buzău, was able to easily repel the ambush during the evening of June 22nd or 23rd. During the engagement, over 2,000 Wallachians fell dead, and later their heads were mounted on Turkish lances. Losing all momentum from his victory at Kilia, Vlad would retreat towards the Carpathians in defeat, with the remnants of his once mighty host. As most of Vlad's supporters defected to Radu after the Great Defeat, Mehmed concluded his Wallachian campaign on June 28th by entering Braila and sailing with his forces back to Constantinople. Meanwhile, the new Wallachian ruler, with the help of Ottoman auxiliary troops, would spend the rest of the summer chasing Vlad and his supporters in the northern reaches of his realm. Having cornered the Impaler prince at his favourite residence at Poianarik Castle, all seemed over for him, but in a surprising move, Vlad was able to slip out of the siege and cross the border into Hungarian Transylvania. However, being politically isolated due to his past campaign of terror in the local region, Vlad found little support for his cause to retake his throne. Not wanting to start a war with the Ottomans over Radu's ascension, and unable to trust him for his past transgressions against the crown, Vlad was imprisoned by local Hungarian authorities by the fall of 1462. The infamous Wallachian voivode, who had impaled tens of thousands of his subjects and countless foes during his reign of terror, was set to spend the next 13 years in a jail cell in the town of Visegrad. During his captivity, tales of his cruelty spread across wider Europe, often depicting the former Wallachian voivode as a bloodthirsty monster resembling the devil. Fast forward to the 19th century, however, and Vlad III Dracula would become an integral part of Romanian national identity, being seen as a brave Romanian ruler who had defied Ottoman aggression with his cruel but effective tactics.
Again, like I mentioned earlier, that's the two discourses surrounding him around the man. Either he's a monster and just write him off as that and nothing more, or like the Romanians who will be like he's a hero. That's usually the thing. Like I said, I feel like my feelings are in the middle. Like I feel like there's a kind of a blend of truth to kind of both that could be seen. Definitely someone who fought against the rising tide of the Ottomans, and you know, there are times I think like Vlad definitely did claim under the banner of Christianity. I think he even had like some like, how do you say, in communication with the Pope, I don't know. But point is, so yeah, you could definitely say in terms of Christian Europe, he was a terror upon the Ottomans. So I don't know, an intelligent man, very cunning, very resourceful, but also incredibly brutal. Like I feel like there's definitely much more to him, as with all real life people. There are multiple layers, and you know, I feel like I would definitely say there's more to him than just he's a monster or even he's just a hero. I feel like there's an in-between where you could see both sides and you can give examples for both, but being one man. It's kind of like the Octavian Augustus thing. For those of you who may not know, I'm a huge fan of Octavian Augustus. He's my favorite Roman emperor. Another man that I've had quite a history with. From 5th grade, I had to do a report on a historical figure. It was like one of my earliest reports, and I chose Augustus Caesar. And, you know, some people just write him off, oh, he was just a monster. Like, Octavian was just a monster and whatnot. And I don't like when sometimes, I mean, I'm not saying you can't have your opinion. I just sometimes don't like when we just oversimplify some people like that. I feel like there's so much different layers and faculties to historical people, as there are with real people. I mean, yeah, there are some people who are just evil, you could say, you know, like maybe like Adolf Hitler, a pretty good one, but I do feel like sometimes there is so much more to these historical figures, like with Augustus. Like, you can point at times at extreme cruelty, sure, but you can also point to a lot of times where he was a really good emperor and, you know, very charitable and in some ways very good for a lot of people. under the Roman banner. And I don't know, like I said, I feel like there's so much more complexity that I wish there would be more discourse around people. Maybe it's just because I like these characters and I'm like beyond fascinated with them that I'm talking like this, but you know, I feel like there's so much more discussion to be had that I'm kind of disappointed that what I've looked into there isn't much in depth about them, so I don't know. Like I said, I feel like there's a lot more to Vlad. There's a lot more layers. And again, I think he's a man, a very intelligent man, who utilized the brutality method to help him against his enemies, to keep Boyars in line, and, you know, just, you know, kind of like Timur in that regard. Like, Timur's definitely someone who, you know, was very brutal, but a very intelligent man, so, I don't know. I keep harping on this, so I'm gonna stop and just let the video end, but yeah.
With Wallachia once again entering into Ottoman vassalage in 1462, here came the end of the most infamous chapter of Vlad's life, but his story was not yet concluded.
Yeah, he eventually gets released, but he dies not too long after. So yeah, this part will end right here. And, yes. I will end the part right here, and then tomorrow we will continue with the next part of the, I probably won't be this talkative for the rest of the parts. Like I said, the only 2 episodes I was familiar with Mehmed is the taking of Constantinople and this whole Vlad the Impaler debacle. Everything else is new territory for me, so I won't yap this much in the future parts at all, since it will be going into very much new territory. But, yeah, I just wanted to talk about Vlad the Impaler, a person who has inspired my own fictional world in my D&D campaigns, and who I think is a very underrated figure, who I wish people would talk more about, other than just he's a monster. He may or may not have directly inspired Dracula. I don't know. It's just something I feel strongly about. But I'll end the video right here, and yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Bye, everyone.